Alien girl studies human's breath pattern, but human finds her species breathes only near mates. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Ethan Cole stepped into the atmospheric simulation lab just past midnight, the hum of compressors filling the air with a soft, steady pulse. Cold white lights washed over metal consoles, reflecting in sharp lines across the glass chamber where mist hung like a thin veil. He paused when he sensed someone already inside. A figure stood near the transparent wall, her silhouette framed by drifting vapor. Ares Vluin didn't turn around at first. Her delicate blue-tinted ears twitched slightly, tracking the rhythm of his breathing the way a musician follows the beat of a metronome. Her hand hovered beside a small device shaped like a tuning fork, its prongs vibrating faintly each time Ethan exhaled. She finally looked over her shoulder, her silver eyes catching the lab light like reflections off still water. "Human," she said softly, voice smooth but puzzled. "Your breath pattern shifts when I approach." Ethan cleared his throat, pretending to check a monitor though she was only a few feet away. The cool air brushed against his arms, crisp enough to prickle the skin. "It's just normal human stress," he said, tapping the display. "Long shift. That's all." Ares stepped closer, not intrusive, just curious in a way that felt more scientific than personal. Her species was known for studying microrhythms in sound and airflow, but he wasn't used to being observed like an experiment. Her gaze moved with precision, not invasive, but focused enough to make him feel the space between them shrink. The mist curled around her as she tilted her head, listening again to the quiet cadence of his breathing. "It rises here," she murmured, lifting the device slightly. "Falls here. And synchronizes here." Ethan forced himself to stay calm, though his lungs seemed to tighten the more she analyzed him. "Machines pick up noise. It happens." Ares blinked slowly, confused but thoughtful, as though filing his reaction into a mental archive. A soft hiss echoed through the chamber, pressure equalizing in the main room. Ethan reacted without thinking, stepping past her to check the gauges, the floor vibrating lightly under his boots as the system stabilized. "We're good," he said quietly. When he turned back, she was closer than before, studying the residual warmth of his breath in the air. Her expression wasn't bold or forward, just deeply, earnestly curious. "Human," she said again, "your breath tells stories I do not understand." Ethan exhaled slowly, a fog of warmth floating between them. "And your device," he replied, "is picking up things you might be misreading." Ares considered this, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light like a calm ocean. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint rhythm of two breaths, one steady, one shifting, filled the cold, sterile room, hinting at something neither of them yet recognized. Ethan tried to focus on the calibration console, but the faint echo of Ares's device kept vibrating in the background, pulsing gently each time he inhaled. The metallic scent of the lab mixed with cool recycled air, and every soft hiss of the vents felt louder than usual. Ares stood a few feet away now, her posture straight, ears angled with quiet concentration, as if listening for something delicate that only she could hear. She lifted the small tuning fork-shaped device again, watching the prongs shimmer with each breath he took. "The pattern is still changing," she said, her voice calm, almost thoughtful. "It reacts to proximity." Ethan forced a slow, steady inhale, then exhale, watching the readings stabilize on the monitor. "Maybe your equipment is off," he said, though he did not sound convinced even to himself. Ares blinked, puzzled. "My instrument is accurate within a margin of 1/1000th. It does not misread." She stepped closer, careful and gentle, almost the way someone approaches a small, fragile creature. She stopped at what she likely judged as a respectful distance, though it was close enough that Ethan felt a shift in the air between them, a subtle warmth rising through the cold lab. Her ears flicked lightly as she listened again. "Your breath is steady now," she murmured. "But earlier, it echoed mine." Ethan frowned slightly, adjusting a dial to give his hand something to do. Humans do that sometimes. It is just normal mirroring. Ares's gaze softened, but not in a way that implied emotion. It was analytical, curious, like a scientist getting closer to a question she had never expected to ask. My people do not mirror breath, she said. We harmonize only when. She stopped suddenly, the tip of her device lowering a fraction. Ethan waited, but she did not finish the sentence. Instead, she looked away, collecting herself with a subtle lift of her shoulders. The overhead lights flickered as the simulation chamber entered its night cycle. The glass darkened slightly, reflecting their silhouettes against a backdrop of drifting vapor. Do you always work the night shift? Ares asked, her voice softer now, her curiosity turning personal rather than scientific. Most of the time, Ethan answered. Less traffic, fewer distractions. But I am a distraction, she said plainly. He exhaled a small laugh under his breath. You are very focused. Ares considered the word, as if testing its weight. Focused, she repeated. Yes. Your breath patterns are unique among the humans here. I wanted to understand why they shift near me. Ethan leaned against the console, letting his shoulders drop from the tension he had not realized he was holding. Maybe it is not that complicated, he said. Maybe I just noticed you were studying me like a storm pattern. Ares's silver eyes lifted to him again, bright against the dimming lights. I did not intend to make you uncomfortable. You did not, Ethan said quickly. Just caught me off guard. She tilted her head slightly. Humans do not like being observed closely? Ethan thought about it, then shook his head. It depends on the person. Ares's ears lowered a bit, almost like an apologetic gesture, though her species did not seem expressive in the human sense. Then I will give you space, she said, stepping back half an inch. It was such a small adjustment, but the air felt thinner without her as close. Ethan cleared his throat. You do not have to. I am just trying to understand what you are looking for. Ares studied the faint mist of his breath once more. Understanding, she said quietly. I am looking for understanding. Her device flickered again, catching the last rise and fall of his chest, and Ethan felt a strange awareness settle over him, like the room was listening too. Ethan powered down the secondary console, but the faint glow of the monitors still traced soft lines across the lab's metal surfaces. The shift was nearly over, yet neither he nor Ares had made any move toward leaving. The room felt quieter than before, as if the filters had lowered their hum to listen in. Ares stood near the transparent chamber window, fingertips hovering just above the glass, her breath forming a pale shimmer against the cool surface. Your atmosphere behaves strangely at night, she said without looking back. It cools quickly. It contracts. It listens. Ethan stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance behind her. It is the pressure change. The whole station adjusts airflow when the crew is asleep. Ares nodded slightly, her reflection capturing her calm concentration. Your world sleeps in cycles. Mine does not. Perhaps that is why breath holds such meaning to us. Ethan leaned on the railing, watching the simulation chamber's mist swirl in slow spirals. Meaning, he asked softly. Ares hesitated, her ears tilting in a conflicted angle. Breath is considered personal. It is the first sound we recognize at birth and the last sound we hear when one of us passes. It is the measure of presence. Ethan absorbed that quietly. And humans, he asked, what do you think our breath means? Ares turned then, just enough for her silver eyes to catch his. I am unsure. Humans speak loudly, move loudly, think loudly. Yet your breath, she paused, searching for the least intrusive words. Your breath changes without your consent. It reacts before you speak, before you decide. Ethan felt something settle low and steady in his chest, a quiet awareness he could not fully name. Earlier today, Ares continued, your breath harmonized with mine, but only for a moment. I did not expect it. Ethan braced his hands on the railing, grounding himself. Maybe it was just an instinct. People match each other sometimes. Ares stepped closer, but gently, her posture open and cautious. Then why did my breath change as well? The question hung between them, soft but heavy. Her device, resting in her palm, vibrated faintly as if answering in her place. Ethan exhaled, slow and measured. I guess that is what we are trying to figure out. A subtle alarm chimed overhead, signaling the end of the simulated night cycle. Lights brightened by a tiny fraction, just enough to erase the shadows that had softened the space. Ares looked toward the ceiling, listening. The cycle resets. Your station wakes. She glanced back at him. Does this mean your shift ends? Technically, Ethan said, checking his watch. But I usually stay a few minutes to make sure the system stabilizes. Ares lowered her device to her side. Then I will stay as well. I would like to observe the transition. She moved to stand beside him, not too close, just within the boundary of shared focus. Their reflections appeared side by side in the chamber glass, two figures outlined by drifting mist and pale laboratory light. Ares watched their reflections instead of their real forms, her voice quiet. It is unusual, she murmured, being comfortable in another's breathing space. My people do not do this. Ethan looked at their reflections too, noticing how their breaths fogged the glass in slightly overlapping patterns. Are you uncomfortable now? He asked. Ares shook her head, her silver eyes steady. No, that is what confuses me. The mist inside the chamber swirled once more, as if echoing the subtle, unspoken shift between them, and Ethan realized her confusion was not fear or concern. It was discovery. The artificial sunrise drifted across the lab's ceiling in a slow gradient of gold and white, washing the metallic panels in a softer warmth than the night cycle allowed. Ethan logged out of the main console, expecting Ares to leave once the shift reset, but she remained beside the observation glass as if anchored by something she still could not name. Her ears lifted slightly at the change in airflow, following the new rhythm the station adopted during its daytime operations. Your station breathes differently now, she said quietly. It feels lighter. Faster. Ethan nodded as he tightened one of the sensor mounts on the wall. Day cycle increases airflow by 12%. It is meant to mimic a busier environment. Ares watched the mist inside the chamber swirl into a new pattern. Humans change their breath the same way, she added. Faster when busy. Lighter when distracted. Ethan shot her a small, half-amused look. You have been analyzing us a lot. I analyze what stands out. Ares replied simply. She lifted her device again, though this time she did not activate it. And you stand out. The statement was delivered with scientific clarity, but something about the honesty behind it tugged at Ethan unexpectedly. He leaned back against the console. Why me? Ares considered the question with the seriousness of someone reviewing data. Your breath does not follow the typical patterns of the other humans here. They remain consistent. Yours shifts in ways I cannot categorize. People react to situations, Ethan said, or to other people. Ares held his gaze, her silver eyes calm but searching. I react as well, she admitted. But my people do not usually show such reactions unless. She stopped again, the sentence caught in her throat the same way it had earlier. Ethan noticed. Unless what? Ares turned away, walking toward the far side of the lab where the lights were softer and the simulation chamber cast thin reflections along the floor. She traced her fingers across the edge of a metal counter, grounding herself in the cold surface. I should not say, she murmured. Ethan followed at a slow pace, giving her space. You can tell me, he said gently. Ares exhaled once, the sound barely audible. My people only experience breath changes when their physiology recognizes something significant. Ethan paused beside her, careful not to intrude. Significant like danger? Stress? Ares shook her head. No, those produce different patterns. Her ears lowered slightly, her version of embarrassment. This pattern occurs during recognition, a biological echo that aligns with another. Ethan felt his pulse thrum, not from fear but from the weight of a realization forming just out of reach. Recognition of what? Ares finally looked up at him, her expression quiet but earnest. Of compatibility, she said. It is rare, it is instinctual, and it is not supposed to happen with another species. Ethan absorbed that like a slow current pulling him forward. You think your breath is reacting to me? Ares nodded once, a cautious, almost reluctant gesture. I do not wish to misinterpret the data, she said. But the patterns have repeated 3 times. And when your breath shifted in response, she hesitated. It startled me. Ethan let out a slow exhale, aware she was listening to every small rise and fall of his chest. It startled me too, he admitted. Ares's voice softened. Your breath harmonized with mine again just now. Ethan blinked, realizing the truth of it in the quiet space between them. Their breaths, without either of them intending it, had found the same steady rhythm. Ares lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not know what that means yet, but I would like to understand it. The mist behind the glass spiraled upward in a slow, bright curl, almost as if echoing her uncertainty, and Ethan knew this was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The station's main corridor was quieter than usual when Ethan and Ares stepped out of the laboratory. Morning crews had not fully arrived, and the low lights along the floor panels created a muted trail that guided them down the curved hallway. The air carried a gentle warmth now, different from the sharp chill of the lab, and it made their breaths blend more naturally without either of them trying. Ares walked beside him with her hands clasped lightly behind her back, her posture straight but her ears tilted in an attentive angle, catching the soft rhythms in the air. Humans breathe differently outside the laboratory, she observed as the hall sensors detected their presence and adjusted the airflow. It is calmer. Ethan smiled faintly. Most people are not being studied while walking down a hallway. Ares considered that, her expression thoughtful. I was not studying you. Not entirely. Ethan gave her a curious glance. Not entirely? Ares slowed her steps as they approached an intersection where a wide window revealed the planet below, its clouds moving in slow ribbons of white. She moved closer to the glass, resting her palm gently against its cool surface. I study patterns, she said. But patterns do not explain everything. Some things must be felt. Ethan joined her at the window, watching the horizon curve. Is that common for your people? Feeling things instead of just measuring them? No, she said honestly. It is not. Her reflection flickered faintly in the glass, silver eyes soft with a kind of confusion that did not look uncomfortable, only sincere. That is why I do not understand this. Ethan let the silence rest between them, a quiet thread unbroken by anything but the steady hum of the station. After a moment, Ares turned back toward him, her ears lifting slightly. May I ask a question? Of course, Ethan replied. She took a breath, slow and deliberate. When your breath harmonizes with mine, do you feel anything unusual? The question was direct, but her voice held a careful gentleness, as if she feared the answer might reveal something about herself she was not ready to face. Ethan exhaled, watching his own breath fog lightly against the window. It feels like I am aware of the room in a different way, he said. Like the air gets thicker, not uncomfortable, just noticeable. Ares nodded slowly, absorbing the answer as if it were a missing variable. My people call that resonance, she said. It is rare. It means two breathing patterns create stability rather than conflict. Ethan raised an eyebrow. So you are saying we stabilize each other? Ares hesitated before answering. I am saying that my physiology believes so. They resumed walking, but the hallway seemed quieter than before, as if each footstep softened itself not to interrupt whatever new understanding was forming between them. They reached the central junction where the cafeteria lights began warming up for the morning crowd. Ethan paused. Do you need to run further tests? Ares shook her head. No, tests will not help with this. She folded her hands together gently. But observation might. Ethan tilted his head. Observation of what? Ares lifted her eyes to him, calm and steady. What happens when two breaths decide to share space? Ethan felt a slow warmth rise in his chest, something steady rather than sudden. Ares seemed to sense it too, her ears tilting in a subtle echo of his exhale. It is happening again, she whispered, almost to herself. Their breaths had fallen into the same rhythm, unforced, natural, synchronizing in a way neither of them could deny. Ethan stood still, aware of the space between them shrinking in significance if not in distance. Ares watched the gentle cloud of shared breath drift between them. This, she murmured, is beginning to feel like something my measurements cannot define. The corridor's lights brightened fully, signaling the arrival of new personnel, but for a few more seconds neither of them moved, held quietly by the recognition neither of them fully understood yet. Ethan's next shift began 12 hours later, but the memory of that shared breath in the corridor stayed with him long after he had left Ares at her research wing. When he returned to the atmospheric lab, the lights were already dimmed for evening calibration checks, casting long reflections across the polished floor. He expected the room to be empty. Instead, Ares stood by the main console, her posture still, her device resting in her hand, but not activated. She turned when she sensed him enter, ears lifting slightly. I reviewed the recordings, she said softly. Not of you. Of me. Ethan set his lunch container aside and joined her. Recordings of your breathing pattern? Yes, she replied. I compared it to the baseline data from before I met you. She hesitated, as if choosing her next words carefully. The change was immediate and consistent. Ethan pulled up a stool and gestured for her to sit, but Ares remained standing, looking almost anchored to the floor. What did you find? He asked. Ares held her device between them, turning it so he could see the faint pulse of light along its surface. This reading, she said, occurs only under a specific biological condition in my species. She swallowed once, a subtle movement he had rarely seen from her. Resonant breathing is part of our bonding instinct. It is not cultural. It is inherent. We cannot force it, and we cannot stop it once it begins. Ethan waited, sensing her uncertainty. But your species does not bond with humans, she continued. There are no records of cross-species resonance. None. Ethan leaned back slightly. Maybe the data is incomplete. Maybe humans just never triggered that response before. Ares shook her head gently. Our biology selects carefully. It is not random. She stepped closer, her voice lowering without losing its clarity. Ethan, I am not supposed to breathe like this near another species. And I cannot explain why my physiology does. Ethan exhaled slowly, and the moment he did, the device's lights pulsed again. Ares glanced at it, then at him, her ears shifting with a conflicted motion. There, she whispered. It happened again. Ethan moved around the console, giving her a bit more space. Ares, he said carefully, what does this pattern mean to your people? She looked down at the device, then back up at him. Her silver eyes held no fear, only truth. It means trust, she said. It means recognition. It is the breath we reserve for those our biology considers safe. Ethan absorbed that. Safe, he repeated. Yes, Ares said. Safe for our presence. Safe for our breath. She looked almost apologetic, but not ashamed. It is not romantic. It is not emotional. It is instinct. But instinct carries meaning. Ethan stepped closer, slow and deliberate, careful not to intrude. Then what about me? Ares held his gaze. Your response is unusual, she said. Humans do not have the same instinct. Yet your breath harmonizes with mine anyway. Not always, but enough that it cannot be coincidence. Ethan rubbed the side of his neck, feeling the weight of her words settle quietly. Maybe it is just natural reaction, he offered. Sometimes people mirror without thinking. No, Ares said gently. It begins before you are aware of it. Your breath shifts the moment you enter my proximity radius. It is unconscious. She took one small step forward. That is what confuses me. Ethan did not retreat. Their breaths crossed softly in the cool lab air, mingling in a faint cloud that drifted slowly upward. Ares stared at that small overlap with quiet bewilderment. Why does your breath answer mine? She whispered, more to herself than to him. Ethan found his answer in the soft rise and fall of the air between them. Maybe some things are not meant to be categorized, he said. Ares lowered her device at last, her fingers relaxing around it. Then I will observe, she murmured. Not with instruments, but with presence. The mist inside the simulation chamber curled upward again, as if echoing her decision, and this time Ethan stood beside her without needing to measure the distance between them. Ethan returned to the lab early for the next cycle, hoping to get ahead on the calibration checks before Ares arrived. The hallway was quiet, lit with the soft blue glow of the station's evening setting, and his footsteps echoed lightly across the polished floor. But when he stepped into the atmospheric chamber, he stopped. Ares was already there. She sat on the floor beside the main console, knees drawn close, her device resting and used at her side. The dim lights above cast a pale shimmer along her silver eyes, revealing an expression he had not seen before. Uncertainty mixed with something deeper. She lifted her head when she sensed him. Ethan, she said softly, her voice steady but her ears angled with a hint of unease. There is something I must tell you. Ethan approached slowly, lowering himself to sit a few feet from her. The cool floor pressed lightly through his work pants, grounding him in the moment. Something happened? He asked. Ares exhaled, and the sound carried more weight than usual. My people arrived this morning. A small research delegation. They asked me routine questions about atmospheric compatibility and acclimation progress. Her fingers tapped lightly against her device, not activating it, but almost seeking comfort in its familiar shape. They monitored my breath, she continued. It is standard procedure for visiting researchers. But they noticed irregularities. Ethan felt a quiet tightness in his chest. Irregularities meaning resonance? Ares nodded. Yes. They asked if I had been exposed to unfamiliar environmental stress. I did not know how to answer. Ethan's brows pulled together. You did not tell them about us? Ares looked at him quickly, her ears lifting in surprise at the phrasing, then gently lowering again. No, she said. I did not tell them anything. But they are curious. And curiosity leads to questions. The simulation chamber released a slow plume of mist, rising behind her like a faint, swirling cloud. Ares watched it drift. If they discover this resonance, they will study it. They will isolate it. They will try to understand why it happened. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Is that dangerous for you? Not dangerous, Ares said, but invasive. Resonance is a private biological response. It is not meant to be observed by others. She hesitated. It is not meant to be shared without consent. Ethan let that settle. The station's quiet hum filled the space between them, rhythmic and steady. Do you regret that it happened? He asked carefully. Ares's answer came without hesitation. No, she shifted slightly, turning her body more toward him. I do not regret what occurred, but I do not understand it, and my people will not either. Ethan exhaled slowly, and Ares's ears flicked at the sound, tracking his breath automatically. The device beside her pulsed once in response. Ethan, she said softly, my delegation will request access to all my recent recordings. They will analyze every breath I have taken in the past 72 hours. Does that include the lab recordings? Ethan asked. Ares nodded. Yes, and they will see resonance the moment they analyze the acoustic data. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Can you delete the recordings? Ares lowered her gaze. I already tried, but the files are encrypted by the station's protocols. She paused. Ethan, they will discover it soon. The admission hung in the air, quiet but heavy. Ethan leaned closer, careful and steady. Then we need to decide what to do, he said. Ares met his eyes again, her silver irises reflecting the faint lights overhead. I do not want them to treat this as an anomaly, she said. It is not an error. It is not a malfunction. Her voice lowered to a near whisper. It is simply what happened between us. Ethan felt his breath shift, slow and deliberate, and Ares inhaled at the same moment, her body responding instinctively. Their breaths aligned again, unforced and natural, and the subtle fog of warm air drifted between them. Ares watched that shared breath as though it carried the answer to her entire confusion. This is the part they will never understand, she murmured. Ethan held her gaze, steady and grounded. Then we protect it, he said. Ares considered those words, absorbing them with quiet seriousness. Yes, she whispered. We must. The mist inside the chamber curled upward once more, echoing their resolve as the soft hum of the station wrapped around them, like a held breath waiting for its next quiet exhale. The next morning arrived with a sharp shift in the station's atmosphere. Ethan felt it the moment he stepped into the main corridor. The air was cooler than usual, the vents running at a precise rhythm that only occurred during high-security evaluations. When he reached the lab, he found Ares standing stiffly near the central console, while 3 members of her delegation reviewed the atmospheric logs. They wore sleek, white suits, their breathing masks shifting faintly with every inhale. Ares's ears were angled downward, a sign of restrained discomfort. She glanced at Ethan the moment he entered, and though she did not speak, he understood the worry behind her stillness. One of the researchers, an older figure with a crystalline badge, looked up. Human Ethan, the individual said, voice formal through the mask. Your presence is relevant. The acoustic logs show anomalies that coincide with your assigned hours. Ethan approached calmly, hands resting lightly at his sides. What kind of anomalies? The researcher pulled up a holographic display. A series of waveforms pulsed across the projection, the peaks and valleys almost identical. Resonant patterns, the researcher said. These are characteristic of Vluan bonding signals. Yet the secondary source, the researcher gestured toward Ethan, appears human. Ares's breath caught, barely a sound, but Ethan heard it. He stepped slightly forward, enough to draw the researcher's attention away from her. Could it be a calibration issue? He asked. The lab has been adjusting pressure cycles frequently. That could distort readings. The older researcher tilted their head, analyzing Ethan's calm expression as though it were another waveform. Our preliminary assessment found no mechanical fault. Resonance does not occur from pressure changes. Another delegate spoke, younger but sharp-eyed. We wish to perform a controlled test. A Vluan subject and the human in question will enter the simulation chamber. Breathing patterns will be recorded for comparison. Ares tensed, her ears lifting in a subtle alarm. That is unnecessary, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The resonance may have been influenced by environmental noise. Ethan recognized the fear behind her words. Not fear of her people, but fear of exposure. Fear of losing something she had not fully named yet. The older researchers shook their head. It is necessary. Resonance is not a trivial anomaly. If cross-species compatibility exists, it must be documented. Ethan inhaled slowly, aware of Ares's ears subtly tracking the sound, even now. If we refuse, he asked. The researcher paused. Refusal would imply purposeful concealment. That would require further investigation and monitoring. Ares's hands tightened slightly at her sides. She did not look at Ethan, but he could sense the quiet distress radiating off her. The device she always carried rested uselessly in her palm, its prongs dim. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself fully between Ares and the delegation. Then test me alone first, he said. Test my breath in isolation before involving her. The younger delegate frowned. That would not yield data about resonance. It would show whether my breathing pattern is inherently irregular, Ethan countered, and whether the anomaly starts without her presence. The delegation exchanged glances, analyzing the logic, weighing protocol against practicality. After a long moment, the older researcher nodded. Very well. The human will undergo the preliminary test. Ares's shoulders relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on Ethan with a quiet mixture of gratitude and worry. The delegates prepared the chamber, adjusting sensors and atmospheric controls with swift precision. Ethan stepped inside, the cool air wrapping around him as the door sealed shut. Through the glass, he saw Ares standing perfectly still, watching him with a look he could feel even through the divide. The vents hummed, and the sensors began recording the pattern of his breath. And then it happened. His breath shifted, not sharply, not drastically, but subtly, instinctively. The researchers leaned in, puzzled. The pattern is inconsistent, one murmured. It fluctuates every few seconds. The older researcher frowned. Human Ethan, what are you focusing on? Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly. Ares, he said. The moment her name left his mouth, Ares inhaled sharply on the other side of the glass. And Ethan's breath matched hers. Not perfectly, but enough that every researcher in the room stared at the readings in stunned silence. The unmistakable shape of resonance began to form on the holographic panel, even without Ares in the chamber. Ares lifted a trembling hand to the glass, as if trying to reach the truth forming between them. Ethan's breath steadied, matching hers once more. The delegation watched the waveforms align, wordless and stunned. And for the first time since the resonance began, Ares whispered one sentence meant only for him, though everyone heard it. Ethan, your breath recognizes mine. The chamber door opened with a slow hydraulic release, the cool air drifting past Ethan as he stepped out. The researchers were gathered around the holographic display, their breathing masks shifting with each steady inhale, but none of them spoke. The resonance readings still glowed across the projection, the two synchronized waveforms pulsing in parallel, undeniable even without Ares inside the chamber. Ares remained near the glass wall, her hand still lifted as if the moment had frozen her in place. When Ethan approached, she lowered her hand slowly, her silver eyes shifting between him and the waveforms hovering in the air. I did not intend for them to see that, she said quietly. Ethan gave her a reassuring look. It was going to show itself eventually. The delegates finally turned toward them. The oldest researcher stepped forward, their voice controlled but edged with astonishment. This resonance is unprecedented. No record exists of a Vluan-forming physiological sync with a human or any other species. The younger delegate adjusted a panel on their wrist device, scanning Ethan's readings again. Human Ethan, your breathing pattern altered before visual contact with Ares. The reaction was anticipatory. That is not possible according to our current models. Ares's ears tilted downward, as if absorbing the weight of the moment. What happens now? She asked. The older researcher looked at her, then at Ethan. We cannot classify this as a malfunction. It is a genuine biological response, but its implications may affect future studies, and therefore we must proceed with caution. Ethan stepped slightly in front of Ares, protective without being forceful. What does that mean for her? The researcher folded their hands behind their back. Ares must decide how she wishes to document this. Resonance is significant in fluid biology. It is not something we can claim without her consent. The younger delegate added, if she chooses not to disclose this, protocol states that the data may be archived privately and encrypted under her authority. Ares looked up sharply, surprised. I may choose. Yes, the researcher replied. This concerns your physiology. The decision is yours. A quiet breath escaped her, light and almost trembling. Ethan watched her process the information, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. Then I choose privacy, she said softly. This resonance is not ready for research. It is not ready for explanation. The delegates exchanged a look, but did not challenge her. Very well, the older researcher said. The data will be classified under your personal biological file and restricted from general analysis. They gathered their instruments, still shaken by what they had witnessed, and began to leave the lab. As the last one exited, the door slid shut with a soft tone, leaving Ethan and Ares alone in the quiet room. The simulation chamber released a gentle swirl of mist, drifting upward in slow spirals. Ares stepped closer to Ethan, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. You protected me, she said. Ethan shrugged gently. You asked me to help protect this. So I did. Ares lowered her gaze, then looked back up at him with a quiet sincerity. Ethan, I do not fully understand why my breath answers yours, but I know it is not something I fear. She took a slow inhale, and Ethan felt his own breath match hers without thinking, falling into the same steady, quiet rhythm. Our resonance may confuse my people, she continued, and it may confuse us as well. But what matters is that it is real. Ethan nodded. Real is enough. Ares looked toward the chamber glass where their faint reflections stood side by side. The mist inside the chamber curled upward one last time, as if marking the moment. Ares turned back to Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. Then whatever this is, we will learn it together. Their breaths aligned once more, soft and steady, a shared rhythm that needed no explanation. And in the stillness of the lab, that quiet harmony was all the truth either of them needed.